Poor boy finds secret passage in train tunnel, but what was inside is frightening. Caleb Miller was walking along the abandoned tracks of the old railroad when he felt something different in the brick wall of the dark tunnel. The 12-year-old boy was looking for pieces of metal to sell at the scrapyard when his fingers found an irregularity that sparked his curiosity. Forcing the loose bricks with a piece of iron he found right there, he managed to open a narrow passage that revealed a small secret compartment. The light emanating from inside left him speechless. But what really scared him were the photographs scattered on the floor showing people he knew from his community in very strange situations. Caleb immediately recognized the face of Mayor Richard Harrison in several of the images. His hands trembled as he picked up the documents that were next to the photos. They were contracts, deeds, and papers he didn't fully understand, but some names caught his attention. His mother's name, Martha Miller, appeared in several documents. The boy's heart raced when he saw his mother's signature on papers that talked about the sale of the house they lived in before, in Beverly Hills. He vaguely remembered that house, as he was only 4 years old when they moved to the current Southside neighborhood where they lived. Martha always said they sold the previous house because they needed the money, but Caleb never understood why they traded a good house for a much worse one. Now looking at those documents, he began to suspect there was something wrong with that story. Among the papers, he also found photographs of other residents of the current neighborhood. Mrs. Dorothy, who lived 3 houses down, appeared signing documents with a confused expression. Mr. Frank, the mechanic on the corner, was also portrayed in one of the images, looking scared. Caleb tucked some of the smaller documents inside his shirt and quickly left the tunnel. The feeling of being watched bothered him, and he noticed that old Arthur, who took care of the abandoned station, was looking at him strangely from the window of his small house. Arthur Thompson had always been a reserved man who rarely talked to the children in the area. At 62, he lived alone taking care of the old station since the railroad was deactivated 15 years ago. Caleb had always felt that man was hiding something, and now that feeling intensified. Running through the dirt roads of the neighborhood, Caleb arrived home with dirty clothes and his heart still racing. Martha was preparing lunch with the few ingredients she managed to buy with the money from her work at Mrs. Evelyn's house, a wealthy family from downtown. At 34, Martha worked as a housekeeper from Monday to Saturday, leaving home at 5 in the morning and returning only at 8 at night. On Sundays, she washed clothes for others to supplement the income. Life had always been difficult after her husband, Thomas Miller, abandoned them when Caleb was only 5 years old. The mother immediately noticed her son's unusual agitation. Caleb had always been a calm and responsible child, different from other kids his age who ran and played all day. He preferred to be alone, exploring the surroundings and looking for ways to help financially at home. "What happened, my son? You're very nervous today," asked Martha, drying her hands on her worn apron. Caleb lied, saying he had tripped and fallen while running, but his mind was buzzing with questions about the documents he found. Why were there photographs of them? Why was his mother's signature on those papers? And why was everything hidden in the abandoned tunnel? During the simple lunch of mac and cheese with hot dogs, Caleb could barely eat. Martha noticed something was different, but decided not to press him. He knew his son and understood that when he was ready he would explain what was happening. That afternoon, while his mother rested before heading to her night cleaning job at an office downtown, Caleb returned to the tunnel. This time he brought a small flashlight he found at home and examined the secret compartment more closely. There were far more documents than he had initially realized. He found a folder full of land purchase and sale contracts, all with ridiculously low prices. The buyers' names were always the same, companies with strange names he had never heard of. What intrigued him most were the bank records stapled to the contracts. Large deposits into the mayor's account always occurred on the same dates as the land sales. Caleb wasn't an expert with numbers, but he could see the pattern. A separate folder contained correspondence between the mayor and men from outside the city. The letters talked about building a large shopping center, exactly where the poor residents' houses now stood. The project had been planned for years. Caleb felt a chill in his stomach, reading a letter that mentioned the need to clear the area for construction to begin. The letter was dated 3 months ago and discussed deadlines and methods to convince residents to leave their homes. When he left the tunnel that afternoon, Caleb was certain he was being followed. A man in a dark suit always kept the same distance behind him, pretending to look at shop windows or talk on the phone. The boy quickened his pace and hid behind a house until the man passed. The next day, Caleb saw the same man talking to the mayor in front of City Hall. They spoke quietly, but seemed to be discussing something important. The man pointed toward the south side where Caleb lived, and the mayor shook his head worriedly. The boy's anxiety increased when he found his mother rummaging under his mattress, where he had hidden some of the smaller documents. Martha held the papers with a confused and frightened expression. "Caleb, where did these documents come from?" she asked, her voice trembling. The boy couldn't lie anymore. He told her about the tunnel and the secret passage, but omitted the details about the photographs and the full extent of what he had discovered. He only mentioned the contracts with her name on them. Martha examined the papers with growing attention. Her eyes filled with tears when she recognized her own signature on documents she didn't remember signing. The handwriting was identical to hers, but she had no memory of those transactions. "My God, Caleb, I remember this day," she said, pointing to a specific date. "I went to City Hall to fix a problem with the paperwork for our old house. I signed several papers they said were just formalities." The mother began to cry as she realized she had been deceived. The sale of the old house wasn't her decision, but the result of an elaborate fraud. They made her sign the property transfer without her realizing what was happening. "They told me it was to regularize the house's situation, that there were problems with the old paperwork," Martha continued. "I trusted them because they were people from City Hall. How could I have imagined they would trick me like that?" Caleb hugged his mother, feeling a mix of anger and determination growing inside him. Now he understood why they lived in such difficult conditions. It wasn't due to his mother's lack of ability or effort, but because they were victims of an elaborate scam. That night, while Martha was at work, Caleb returned once more to the tunnel. This time he found Arthur waiting for him near the entrance to the secret compartment. "I knew you'd come back, boy," the old man said in a tired voice. "It was about time someone discovered all this." Caleb was frightened at first, but something in Arthur's tone reassured him. The man didn't seem threatening, but rather relieved to finally be able to talk about the matter. "Did you know about the documents?" asked Caleb. "I did, and much more than that," replied Arthur. "I was the one who hid everything in there. I was waiting for someone brave enough to do something to show up." Arthur explained that he had also been a victim of the same fraud years ago. When he worked on the railroad, he owned a house near the station. When the line was decommissioned, he lost his job and was forced to sell his house for a ridiculous price through the same scheme. "They offered me this job of looking after the abandoned station as a form of compensation," explained Arthur, "but it was just to keep me quiet and nearby, under control. I knew too much about what was happening." The old man revealed that for years he had collected evidence of the scheme, photographing secret meetings and copying documents when he had the chance. He worked discreetly, documenting everything in the hope of one day being able to expose the truth. "Why didn't you report it before?" asked Caleb. "To whom, son? The mayor controls everything in the city. The very oversight structure is involved in the scheme. I needed someone from the outside or a situation that would force the truth to come out." Arthur explained that the plan was always broader than Caleb imagined. It wasn't just about a few houses, but a project to completely transform the poor area of the city. The shopping center was just the beginning. "They want to build a huge commercial complex," said Arthur. "A mall, a hotel, office buildings, all where the poor people's houses are now, and they're willing to do anything to get it." Caleb asked about his father. He had always heard from his mother that Thomas left them because he couldn't handle the poverty and the family responsibility. But now, with so many discoveries, he began to doubt that version. "Your father didn't leave of his own free will, son," said Arthur with a sad expression. "He discovered part of the scheme and was threatened. He had to choose between his family's safety and staying to fight." This revelation hit Caleb like a punch to the gut. His father wasn't the coward he had always imagined, but a man who made the ultimate sacrifice to protect his family. The anger he felt toward him turned into a deep pain of loss. "Where is he now?" asked Caleb, his eyes full of tears. "I don't know for sure," replied Arthur, "but I know he left something for you before he left. a letter explaining everything. It's here in the documents. Arthur showed a sealed envelope with Martha's name written in Thomas's handwriting. Caleb recognized his father's penmanship, which was always very distinctive. The envelope was yellowed with age, showing it had been stored there for many years. "Why did my mother never receive this letter?" asked Caleb. "Because your father asked me to keep it, and only deliver it when you were ready to know the truth," explained Arthur. "He knew Martha would suffer greatly upon learning that he didn't abandon you, but was forced to leave." Caleb took the letter with trembling hands, but decided not to open it at that moment. He wanted to be with his mother when they read his father's words together. It would be too important a moment to experience alone. In the following days, Caleb noticed changes in the city. The man in the suit appeared more frequently, always observing the houses in the neighborhood and talking to residents. Some families began receiving visits from people claiming to be interested in buying their properties. Mrs. Dorothy commented to Martha that well-dressed men offered a good sum for her house. The offer seemed tempting for an elderly lady living on a small pension, but something about their insistence made her suspicious. "They said it was urgent, that I had to decide quickly," Mrs. Dorothy recounted. "But when I asked why the rush, they couldn't explain properly." Mr. Frank also received a similar visit. They offered to buy his auto repair shop and the land it was on for a price that seemed good, but much lower than it was really worth. The psychological pressure was constant. Phone calls, repeated visits, insistence on deadlines. Caleb noticed that the scheme was accelerating. Something had changed, and they seemed to be in a hurry to remove all the families from the neighborhood. Perhaps they had discovered that someone knew the truth. One night, Martha came home from work earlier than usual. She had lost her job at Mrs. Evelyn's house without a convincing explanation. The employer simply said she no longer needed her services, but offered a severance payment that was too generous for a normal dismissal. "Caleb, I'm very worried," said Martha. "Losing my job like this, for no reason, and then getting this extra money. Something is wrong." The boy decided it was time to tell his mother the whole truth. He showed all the documents he had found, explained about the housing scheme, and revealed what Arthur had told him about their father. Martha listened to everything in silence, with expressions alternating between shock, sadness, and anger. When Caleb showed her his father's letter, she began to cry uncontrollably. "I always knew Thomas wouldn't abandon us of his own free will," she said between sobs, "but it was easier to accept that he was a coward than to imagine something terrible happened to him." They opened the letter together. Thomas explained in detail how he discovered the real estate fraud scheme, the threats he received, and the impossible decision he had to make. He knew that if he stayed, he would put Martha and Caleb in danger. The letter ended with a plea for forgiveness and a promise that he would return one day when it was safe. Thomas also revealed that he had left evidence hidden in several places, including a bank account with money saved especially for his family. "He never forgot us," murmured Martha. "All this time I thought we weren't important to him, but in fact he sacrificed himself for us." Caleb felt a mixture of pride and longing. Discovering that his father was a hero instead of a coward completely changed how he saw his own identity. Now he understood where his determination to fight for justice came from. The next day they went to see Arthur to plan the next step. The old man had spent the night organizing all the documents and evidence collected over the years. He had photographs, audio recordings, and copies of contracts that proved the entire scheme. "We have enough evidence to bring down this whole network," said Arthur, "but we need to be careful. They have a lot of power and won't give up easily." Martha suggested seeking help from someone outside the city, perhaps a lawyer or journalist who wasn't involved in the local scheme, but Arthur explained they had tried that before with other people, without success. "The problem is they control the information," said Arthur. "They always manage to discredit anyone who tries to expose the truth. We need a different strategy." Caleb had an idea. What if they could gather all the affected families and confront the mayor publicly during a town hall meeting? With so many people together and solid evidence, it would be harder to cover up the case. The idea seemed good, but they knew convincing the neighbors wouldn't be easy. Many people were afraid of retaliation. and preferred to accept the buyout offers, even knowing they were being cheated. They started by visiting Mrs. Dorothy, who had always been a respected person in the neighborhood. When they saw the evidence, she was outraged and immediately offered to help organize the other residents. "I always suspected something was wrong," said Mrs. Dorothy. "The way they pressured us to sign the papers, the excessive hurry, the constant visits. Now it all makes sense." Mr. Frank was harder to convince. The mechanic was in financial trouble, and the offer to buy his shop would solve many immediate problems. But when he saw how much his land was really worth, he changed his mind. "They're offering a tenth of the real value," said Frank, calculating in his head. "With the true amount, I could set up a much better shop somewhere else and still have money left over." Little by little, they managed to convince several families in the neighborhood. Each person who joined the movement brought additional information about pressures and suspicious offers they had received. The pattern became clearer and clearer. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now, continuing. But not all the neighbors joined the cause. Some families, especially those in more desperate financial situations, decided to accept the offers and move away. The fear of the consequences of confronting powerful people was greater than the outrage over the injustice. The Baxter family, who lived in the house next to Caleb's, sold their property and moved out of town in less than a week. Mrs. Brenda said goodbye to Martha with tears in her eyes, saying she didn't have the courage to fight. "Martha, you are brave, but I have 3 small children to protect," said Mrs. Brenda. "I can't risk their safety over a fight we might not win." The neighbor's departure saddened Caleb, but it also strengthened his determination. He understood that not everyone was in a position to fight, but that made the battle of those who could confront the injustice even more important. Arthur then revealed information that completely changed their strategy. He had discovered that the former City Hall secretary, Mrs. Susan Graham, kept copies of many important documents as a kind of personal insurance. "Susan worked at City Hall for 30 years, explained Arthur. "She was always discreet, but she knew everything that happened. When she retired 2 years ago, she took some evidence with her for safety." Mrs. Susan lived in a middle-class neighborhood in the city and was initially reluctant to get involved. At 58, she wanted to enjoy her retirement in peace, far from City Hall's problems. But when she saw the evidence Caleb and Arthur brought, her conscience weighed on her. Susan had always known that illegal schemes happened at City Hall, but she never had the courage to report it while she depended on the job to survive. "I feel guilty for having remained silent all these years," admitted Mrs. Susan. "I saw so many injustices and never did anything to stop them. Perhaps now I can make up a little for the wrong I let happen." Susan revealed she had recordings of incriminating conversations between the mayor and businessmen. As a secretary, she was often in the room during important meetings and began discreetly recording after she realized the seriousness of the schemes. The recordings were devastating. They showed the mayor planning frauds, arranging bribe amounts, and discussing ways to pressure residents to sell their properties. There were even conversations about intimidating methods to speed up the process. "These recordings could bring down not just the mayor, but the entire network of people involved," said Susan. "I have evidence against council members, public officials, and out-of-town businessmen." With this arsenal of proof, the group began planning the public exposure of the scheme. They decided the best time would be during the next town hall session, when more people would be present and it would be harder to cover up the case. But their plans suffered a setback when Caleb discovered they were being watched more intensely. The man in the suit was now always near their home, and strange cars drove through the neighborhood at unusual hours. One night, Martha was approached as she left the new job she had gotten at a bakery. A polite but intimidating man offered a generous sum for her and her son to leave the city immediately. "Mrs. Martha, we know you're going through difficulties," said the man. "This is an opportunity to start a new life elsewhere, with enough resources to begin again peacefully." Martha refused the offer, but the man made it clear that their stay in the city could become complicated. The threats were subtle, but the meaning was clear. Take the money or face the consequences. Caleb was furious when he learned of the encounter. The anger he felt towards those responsible for the scheme intensified upon seeing his mother being threatened. His determination to expose the truth grew even stronger. "They can try to intimidate us, but we won't give up," Caleb told his mother. "Dad was forced to leave to protect us. Now it's our turn to fight for the justice he couldn't achieve." Martha agreed, despite her fear. She understood that giving in to the threats would only perpetuate the cycle of injustice that had victimized so many families. They had to be brave for everyone's sake. Arthur suggested they speed up their plans for public exposure. The pressure on them was mounting, and soon they might not have another opportunity to act. The next town hall session was in a week, enough time to organize everything. During that week, strange things began happening in the neighborhood. The electricity supply became unstable with frequent blackouts. The water supply also started having problems, forcing residents to seek alternative solutions. "It's psychological pressure," explained Arthur. "They want to show they can make your lives impossible if you don't cooperate. It's an old tactic to force people to accept offers." Despite the difficulties, the group continued meeting and organizing the presentation of evidence. Mrs. Dorothy offered to speak on behalf of the residents, as she was articulate and not easily intimidated. 2 days before the town hall session, something happened that completely changed the situation. Caleb received an unexpected visit. An elegant woman who introduced herself as a lawyer and said she had important information about their case. "My name is Dr. Victoria Sterling," said the woman. "I represent a group of investors who are investigating irregularities in this city's real estate projects. We heard you have important evidence." Caleb was suspicious. How did she know about the evidence? And why would outside investors be interested in the case? He decided not to say anything until consulting Arthur and his mother. When he told them about the lawyer's visit, Arthur grew concerned. He suspected it might be a trap to find out what they knew and plan a counterattack. "Don't trust anyone who shows up offering help at this moment," warned Arthur. "They might be trying to discover our evidence to destroy or discredit it." But Martha had a different intuition. Something about the lawyer's demeanor seemed genuine to her, and she thought it was worth at least hearing what the woman had to say. "What if she can really help us?" questioned Martha. "Alone, we might not be able to stand up to all their power. Perhaps we need outside allies." After much discussion, they decided to schedule a meeting with the lawyer in a public place, with several people present as witnesses. If it was a trap, at least they would be safe. The meeting took place in the town's central square during the busy lunch hour. Dr. Victoria Sterling arrived punctually and brought documents that proved her identity and the legitimacy of the group she represented. "You are not the only victims of this scheme," explained the lawyer. "We are investigating similar cases in several towns in the region. Always the same pattern: real estate fraud, forged documents, psychological pressure." Victoria revealed that the scheme was much bigger than they imagined. A network of powerful people operated in several towns, always with the same goal: to take possession of valuable land by paying ridiculously low prices through elaborate frauds. "The shopping center they plan to build here is just one piece of a much larger puzzle," said the lawyer. "They have similar projects in development in at least 5 towns in the region." This revelation frightened and at the same time energized the group. On one hand, they discovered they were facing even more powerful adversaries than they had imagined. On the other, they knew they were not alone in the fight. Victoria offered free legal support and promised that her organization would cover all the costs of the legal process. In return, she asked for access to the evidence they had collected to strengthen similar cases in other towns. "Our organization is funded by people who were victims of similar schemes in other regions," explained Victoria. "They invest resources in the fight against this type of crime because they know how important it is to prevent other families from going through the same suffering." After talking among themselves, the group decided to accept the lawyer's help. The evidence they had was solid, and having professional legal support would greatly increase their chances of success. But they decided to keep the original plan of a public exposure at the town hall. Victoria agreed, saying that public pressure would be important to prevent the case from being buried in the courts. On the eve of the town hall session, Caleb could barely sleep. Anxiety and anticipation consumed him. He knew the next day could completely change his life and the lives of many families in the town. Martha was also nervous, but she felt proud of her son's courage. In just a few months, Caleb had transformed from a curious child into a brave young man willing to fight for justice. "Your father would be very proud of you," she said, hugging her son. "You have the same determination and honesty I always admired in him." On the day of the session, the town hall was packed. The news that there would be important revelations spread quickly, and many curious people showed up to follow the events. Mayor Richard Harrison arrived with a retinue of aides and lawyers. His expression was tense, showing that he knew something important was about to happen. He looked directly at Caleb with an intimidating expression. Mrs. Dorothy was the first to speak. In a firm and clear voice, she recounted the pressures the residents had been suffering and presented the first evidence of the real estate fraud scheme. "Council members, we have been systematically deceived," said Mrs. Dorothy. "Our homes have been stolen through false documents and psychological pressure. We have proof of what we are saying." The mayor tried to interrupt several times, claiming the accusations were unfounded and that the residents were being manipulated by malicious people. But the evidence presented was too consistent to be ignored. When Arthur stood up to speak, the room fell completely silent. Everyone knew the old caretaker of the abandoned station, but no one imagined he had such important information. "Ladies and gentlemen, I have worked honestly my entire life," began Arthur. "I never imagined that one day I would have to be here, exposing the corruption that destroyed my life and the lives of many families." Arthur presented the photographs of the secret meetings and the documents that proved the fraudulent transactions. Each piece of evidence was more shocking than the last, creating a complete picture of the criminal scheme. The mayor grew increasingly nervous. He tried to argue that the documents were fake, but he couldn't explain how his image appeared in the photographs or how his signature was present on so many suspicious contracts. It was then that Mrs. Susan stood up to speak. Her presence caused a commotion in the room, as everyone knew she had been the City Hall secretary for decades and knew all the secrets of the municipal administration. "I worked 30 years at City Hall, and I saw a lot of things," said Susan, with a trembling voice. "I was always loyal and discreet, but I can no longer remain silent in the face of so much injustice." Susan began to play back the audio recordings she had secretly collected. The mayor's voice was clearly recognizable, discussing bribe amounts and methods to force residents to sell their properties. The impact of the recordings was devastating. Even the mayor's supporters in the town hall could not defend the indefensible. The evidence was too clear to be contested or ignored. Martha was the last to speak. With tears in her eyes, she told her personal story, how she was tricked into signing documents that resulted in the loss of her home, how she was forced to live in precarious conditions, and how she discovered the truth about her husband's fate. "My family was destroyed by this scheme," said Martha. "My husband was forced to leave us to protect us. My son grew up believing his father was a coward, when in reality he was a hero." Martha's words deeply touched the audience. Many people began to cry, identifying with her suffering and realizing they could have gone through the same situation. Caleb stood up to conclude the presentations. Despite his young age, his speech was mature and impactful. He spoke about the importance of fighting for justice and how a 12-year-old boy could make a difference when he had enough courage. "I found those documents by chance, but I understood it was my responsibility to do something with them," said Caleb. "If I had stayed silent, other families would continue to be deceived like mine was." The president of the town hall, visibly shaken by the revelations, announced that the facts presented would be investigated immediately. He also promised that measures would be taken to protect residents from future pressure. But Caleb knew the battle was only beginning. Exposing the scheme was just the first step. Now they would need to fight in the courts to recover what had been stolen and ensure those responsible were punished. After the session, several people approached to congratulate the group for their courage and offer support. Residents from other neighborhoods also reported similar situations, showing the problem was even bigger than they had imagined. The mayor left the town hall surrounded by lawyers and aides, but it was evident his political situation had become untenable. The evidence presented was too solid to be ignored or contested. In the following days, the story gained coverage in local newspapers and radio stations. Journalists from various cities came to interview Caleb and the others involved, giving even more visibility to the case. Public pressure forced the start of an official investigation into the City Hall's activities. Prosecutors from other cities also became interested in the case, seeing connections with similar situations in their jurisdictions. Victoria, the lawyer who had sought them out, was coordinating the legal side of the fight. She organized a team of professionals to handle all legal aspects of the case, from the recovery of the properties to seeking criminal penalties. "You took the most important first step," Victoria told the group. "You had the courage to expose the truth publicly. Now our job is to ensure that courage results in effective justice." But the fight would not be easy. The mayor's lawyers and his associates began a campaign to discredit the evidence, claiming the documents had been fabricated by malicious individuals. They also launched a legal offensive against Caleb and his family, alleging the boy had committed trespass by entering the abandoned tunnel. It was a clear attempt to intimidate and divert focus from the real issues. The intimidation strategy did not work. The local community mobilized in support of the Miller family and the other residents affected by the scheme. Shopkeepers, professionals, and even some opposition politicians publicly took a stand in favor of the cause. An important discovery came when experts analyzed the documents found in the tunnel. Technical examinations proved that the residents' signatures had been forged using sophisticated imitation techniques. "The handwriting analyses are conclusive," explained Victoria. "The signatures were reproduced by someone very skilled at imitation, but microscopic examinations show subtle differences that prove forgery." This discovery further strengthened the case against the mayor and his accomplices. Document forgery was a serious crime that could result in jail time, independent of the civil issues related to the properties. As the official investigation progressed, Caleb continued exploring the tunnel in search of more evidence. On one of his expeditions, he found a second secret compartment that had gone unnoticed initially. This new hiding place contained information about the destination of the money obtained from the frauds. Detailed spreadsheets showed how the funds were distributed among the scheme's participants and how they were laundered through shell companies. "They didn't just steal our homes," Caleb said to Arthur. "They stole the future of dozens of families and used the money to enrich themselves further." The psychological impact of the discoveries was immense. Caleb felt overwhelmed by the responsibility of carrying all that information and fighting against such powerful people. Sometimes anxiety kept him from sleeping. Martha noticed her son's stress and tried to offer emotional support. She knew Caleb had matured very quickly due to the circumstances, but he was still a child who needed care and protection. "Son, you've already done far more than any adult would have," said Martha. "You don't have to carry all this weight alone. Now we have professional help and people who believe in our cause." But Caleb felt responsible for continuing to fight. The memory of his father and the suffering of so many families motivated him to persist, even when exhaustion and fear tried to discourage him. An unexpected event brought new hope to the case. A former City Hall employee, who had been fired months earlier, sought out Victoria offering more evidence against the scheme. "I was fired because I refused to participate in some illegal activities," the former employee recounted. "I kept copies of various documents as protection, but now I want to use them to help the victims." The new evidence included irregular payment orders, contracts with shell companies, and correspondence that revealed the extent of the criminal network. The case was becoming even more solid. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now, continuing. The pressure on the mayor increased when opposition council members presented a formal request for his removal due to suspicion of illegal activities. The political process ran parallel to the criminal investigation. Caleb followed all developments with interest and concern. He knew there was still a long way to go for justice to be completely served, but he felt they were on the right track. One morning, as he was getting ready for school, Caleb received a visit that would change his life forever. A thin man with a graying beard and tired eyes was standing at the door talking to his mother. It was Thomas Miller, his father, who had returned after learning about the family's struggle through the news circulating in the region. The reunion was emotional and revealing, full of tears, explanations, and forgiveness. "Son, you've become the man I always dreamed you'd be," said Thomas, hugging Caleb. "You did what I didn't have the courage to do so many years ago. Face injustice head on." Thomas told of the years of forced exile, working in distant cities and always afraid to return. He had followed his son's growth from afar and was proud of the courage and determination Caleb showed. "When I learned you were fighting the same scheme that forced me to leave, I couldn't stay away," explained Thomas. "It was time to come back and help my family achieve the justice that was always ours." The father's return brought more than emotional support. Thomas had collected evidence during his years of exile, documenting similar activities in other cities and establishing connections that could further strengthen the case. "The scheme is national," revealed Thomas. "I met other families who were victims of identical frauds. There is a criminal organization operating in several regions, always using the same methods." This information took the investigation to a new level. The authorities realized they were not dealing with an isolated case of local corruption, but with an organized criminal network of national scope. The Miller family was reunited, stronger and more united by the common fight. Caleb felt complete, for the first time in many years. Having his father by his side during this battle gave him a new strength and a sense of security he hadn't felt in a long time. But their opponents would not give up easily. Thomas's return was interpreted as an even greater threat, and the intimidation attempts intensified. Strange cars began circling the south side again, and anonymous threatening phone calls became frequent. Victoria advised the family to take safety precautions and suggested they consider moving temporarily to a safer location until the situation stabilized. "You have become symbols of the fight against this criminal network," explained Victoria. "That makes you targets, but it also makes you more powerful. Society is on your side." Caleb did not want to leave the city at this crucial moment. He felt that fleeing would be a betrayal to all the residents who trusted him and hoped the fight would continue to the end. "If we leave now, they'll think they've won," argued Caleb. "We can't abandon our community when it needs us most." Thomas supported his son's decision, but as a father he worried about the family's safety. They reached a compromise. They would stay in the city, but would take extra safety precautions. The official investigation advanced significantly when prosecutors obtained court orders to examine the mayor's and his associates' bank accounts. The financial records revealed suspicious transactions that confirmed the accusations. "We found deposits that match exactly the dates of the fraudulent transactions," explained the prosecutor in charge of the case. "The pattern is too clear to be a coincidence." Simultaneously, the investigation revealed that several companies involved in the scheme were owned by relatives and close friends of the mayor. It was an elaborate system to hide the illegal origin of the funds. The mayor was formally charged with racketeering, document forgery, and money laundering. Several other City Hall employees were also indicted, dismantling the entire corruption network. For Caleb and his family, seeing those responsible officially charged was an important victory, but they knew the legal process would still take time and face many appeals and attempts at delay. "Criminal justice is important, but our main goal is to recover our properties," Victoria reminded them. "We will fight on both fronts, criminal and civil." The property recovery process was complex because many plots of land had already been resold to third parties in good faith. It was necessary to find solutions that did justice to the victims without harming innocent buyers. A creative solution was proposed: create a compensation fund using the assets confiscated from the criminals to compensate all affected parties. This way, the original victims would be compensated without harming subsequent buyers. The proposal was well received by all involved and gained support from authorities and the local community. It was a fair way to resolve a complex situation without creating new injustices. While the legal proceedings followed their course, life in the city began to normalize. The climate of fear and intimidation decreased significantly with the mayor's removal and the dismantling of his corruption network. Caleb returned to attending school normally, but now he was treated as a hero by his classmates and teachers. His story had inspired many people and become an example of how individual courage can make a difference. "You proved that age doesn't matter when fighting for justice," his teacher said. Your courage inspired the whole community to believe it's possible to change things. But Caleb remained modest about his role in the fight. He knew the success was the result of the joint work of many courageous people who decided not to accept injustice passively. Months later, when the first criminal trial was held, Caleb was present in the courtroom along with his family and the other affected residents. Seeing those responsible being convicted was a moment of great emotion and satisfaction. The mayor was sentenced to 8 years in prison for racketeering and corruption. Others involved received lesser sentences, but all were forced to return the illegally obtained funds. "Justice has been done," said Martha, hugging her husband and son. "Your father would be proud of the man you are becoming, Caleb." The compensation the family received allowed them to buy their own house in a better neighborhood, but they chose to remain in the same community, now as the legal owners of a larger and better located plot of land. Thomas found work at a construction company and dedicated himself to rebuilding the life that had been interrupted years before. Martha opened a small sewing business, fulfilling an old dream of having financial independence. Caleb continued his studies with even more determination. His experience in the fight for justice sparked an interest in law, and he began to dream of becoming a lawyer to help other families in similar situations. Arthur was officially recognized as a justice collaborator and received compensation for the years of exploitation he suffered. With the money, he renovated his small house and began to live with more dignity. Mrs. Susan became an active advocate for citizens' rights. She used her experience in public administration to guide others on how to identify and report cases of corruption. The community was transformed after the victory over the criminal scheme. The residents developed a greater awareness of their rights and created an association to protect themselves from future attempts at exploitation. The tunnel where it all began was turned into a memorial to the fight for justice. A plaque was placed at the site, telling the story of how a brave boy's curiosity changed the life of an entire community. Caleb would often visit the tunnel, not in search of more secrets, but to reflect on everything that had happened. The place represented the beginning of a journey that had transformed not only his life, but the lives of many people. 2 years after the initial events, Caleb, now 14, was invited to speak at schools in other cities about his experience. His story became an example of how young people can be agents of social transformation. "The most important thing is not how old you are, but the courage to do what's right," Caleb would say in his talks. Sometimes, one small person can make a big difference. The criminal network operating in other cities was also dismantled, thanks to the evidence collected in Caleb's case. Hundreds of families in various regions recovered their properties or received fair compensation. Victoria continued working at the organization that fought real estate fraud, using the experience gained from Caleb's case to refine strategies for combating similar schemes. The Miller family's story became a case studied in law schools as an example of how the coordination between civil society, the press, and the justice system can defeat organized corruption. But for Caleb, the greatest victory was not the awards or recognition he received. The greatest victory was seeing his family reunited and his community living with dignity and hope. Years later, when Caleb graduated from law school, he returned to his hometown to practice law. His first client was an elderly lady who was being pressured to sell her house for an unfair price. "Dr. Caleb, can you help me?" asked the lady, not knowing she was speaking to the boy who, years before, had uncovered a similar scheme. "Of course I can," replied Caleb, smiling. "Fighting injustice is my specialty. Let's examine your case very carefully." And so the circle was complete. The boy who had found a secret passage in the abandoned tunnel had become a man dedicated to opening paths to justice in the lives of others. The city also transformed over the years. Transparency and public administration increased significantly, and citizens became more vigilant regarding the actions of their leaders. The shopping mall that was to be built over the demolished houses never materialized. In its place, City Hall created a public park with recreational areas for the community's families. Caleb would often take his children to play in that park, telling them the story of how that place was almost stolen from the community. It was important that the new generation knew about the struggle that had been fought. "Daddy, did you really find treasures in that tunnel?" his youngest daughter would ask. "Yes, I did, my dear," Caleb would answer. "I found the greatest treasure there is, the truth, and the truth set us free." The most important lesson Caleb learned from the whole experience was that justice doesn't happen on its own. It takes courage, persistence, and the unity of people who believe that right can triumph over wrong. Martha, now a respected lady in the community, remained proud of her son and her husband. Seeing the family united and prosperous was the fulfillment of a dream she had kept alive during the most difficult years. Thomas retired as a builder, but remained active in the neighborhood association, helping to resolve conflicts and guiding families facing difficulties similar to those they had overcome. Arthur lived to see all the transformation that his courage in safeguarding the evidence had brought about. At 70, he became a sort of community advisor, always available to share his experience with the younger generation. Mrs. Susan became a volunteer consultant in public transparency, helping other cities implement mechanisms for social oversight of municipal administration. The story of the Miller family proved that even the simplest people, when united for the cause of justice, can confront and defeat corruption and oppression. The abandoned tunnel, which once hid dark secrets, became a symbol of hope and transformation. Caleb sometimes took visitors there to show where it all began. "This is where my life changed forever," he would say. "Not because I found something extraordinary, but because I had the courage to act when I discovered an injustice." Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now continuing, the transformation was not limited only to the material aspect of the lives of those involved. The experience strengthened community bonds and created a sense of empowerment that would last for generations. The children who grew up hearing Caleb's story developed a sharper civic awareness. They learned from an early age that they have rights and responsibilities, and that they can make a difference when they organize for a just cause. The local school included the story in its citizenship education curriculum. Teachers used the case as a practical example of how the justice system works and the importance of social participation in a democracy. Caleb married a law school classmate who was impressed by his story and shared his passion for social justice. Together, they opened a law firm specializing in human rights and collective causes. The couple had 3 children, and Caleb made a point of raising them with the values he learned during his journey: courage, honesty, solidarity, and social responsibility. "Never forget that you have the power to change the world," he would tell his children. "You can start by changing your community, your family, your own life. Small changes generate great transformations." The city became a model of transparency and citizen participation in the region. Other cities sent delegations to learn about the social oversight mechanisms that had been implemented after the Miller family case. Caleb frequently participated in these visits, explaining how popular mobilization had been fundamental to defeating corruption. His experience became a case study replicated in other localities. The corrupt former mayor served his sentence in prison and, upon release, left the region forever. He tried to rebuild his life in another state, but carrying the weight of a corruption conviction made it difficult to find legitimate opportunities. Some of the old collaborators in the scheme also tried to start over in other cities, but the repercussions of the case and their criminal records limited their possibilities of resuming illicit activities. The National Organization for Combating Real Estate Corruption, of which Victoria was a part, expanded significantly after the success of Caleb's case. New offices were opened to assist victims across the country. The pioneering work developed in the case inspired changes in national legislation. New laws were created to facilitate the identification and punishment of real estate fraud, as well as to expedite the process of recovering stolen properties. Caleb followed the progress of these laws through the National Congress closely. He was invited several times to give testimony in parliamentary committees, sharing his experience as a victim and defender of citizens' rights. "It's moving to see how our local struggle resulted in changes that benefit millions of people," Caleb would comment. "It proves that no just cause is too small to make a difference." The family kept in touch with all the people who helped them during the fight. Victoria visited the town annually, not only to follow the developments of the case, but because she had developed a friendship with the Miller family. Arthur became a sort of adoptive grandfather to Caleb's children. The children loved hearing his stories about the railroad days and how he helped expose the corrupt. "Grandpa Arthur, how did you have the courage to keep those documents for so long?" the children would ask. "Because I knew that one day the truth would come out," he would answer. "Injustice can last a long time, but the truth is stronger and always finds a way." Mrs. Susan continued living in the town and became very close to the Miller family. She helped take care of the children and was proud to have contributed to the victory of justice after years of silence. The old train station was restored and transformed into a community cultural center. Arthur was named honorary director of the space, a fitting tribute for his years of dedication to the place. The cultural center offered educational activities for children and youth, always focusing on civic education and the development of ethical values. It was a way to perpetuate the lessons learned from the fight against corruption. Caleb regularly gave lectures at the cultural center, telling his story to new generations and encouraging young people to believe in their power to bring about social change. Every year, on the anniversary of the discovery of the documents in the tunnel, the community organized a celebration of the victory of justice. It was a time for fellowship and renewal of commitments to honesty and transparency. During these celebrations, Caleb would always visit the memorial tunnel accompanied by his family. It was a moment of reflection on the journey traveled and of gratitude for all the people who made the victory possible. "Dad, were you ever scared during that time?" his eldest son asked during one of these visits. "I was very scared, son," Caleb answered honestly, "but I learned that courage isn't the absence of fear. Courage is doing what's right despite the fear." The story became even more inspiring because it demonstrated that ordinary people, without special resources or extraordinary powers, can face and defeat very powerful adversaries when they fight together for the truth. The book that Caleb wrote about his experience became a national bestseller. The proceeds from the sales were entirely donated to organizations that fight corruption and support families victimized by fraud. "I don't want to profit from a story that belongs to our entire community," Caleb explained. "What's important is that this experience continues to inspire others to fight for justice." Universities in several countries included the case in their law, sociology, and political science courses. The story demonstrated how the coordination between different social actors can create significant structural changes. Caleb was invited to speak at international conferences on fighting corruption. His unique perspective, as someone who lived the problem since childhood, offered valuable insights for experts and policymakers. But despite all the international attention, Caleb never lost his roots. He continued living in the same town, staying close to the community that had supported him during the most difficult times. "This is my place in the world," he would say. "My journey started here, and here is where I want to keep making a difference in people's lives." The town prospered in the years following the resolution of the case. Its reputation as a place where justice triumphed over corruption attracted legitimate and honest investment, generating jobs and income for the entire population. Ethical business owners chose the town to set up their operations, knowing they would find an environment of transparency and legal security. It was the opposite of what the corrupt had planned with their fraudulent schemes. The economic growth was accompanied by balanced social development. Public funds, now managed transparently, were invested in education, healthcare, and infrastructure. Caleb watched this development with satisfaction, but always reminded the people about the importance of maintaining permanent vigilance over the actions of their leaders. "Corruption is like a weed," he often said in his talks. "If we let our guard down, it grows back. Transparency and social oversight must be exercised constantly." His children grew up in this environment of civic awareness and social responsibility. From a young age, they learned about the importance of honesty, justice, and commitment to the common good. The eldest followed in his father's footsteps and also studied law, specializing in environmental law. The second son chose investigative journalism, inspired by the importance of the media in the fight against corruption. The youngest daughter was still deciding on her career, but already showed an interest in working with social causes. It was evident that the entire family would remain committed to social transformation. Martha, now a grandmother, dedicated herself to community craft projects that generated income for women in vulnerable situations. It was her way of giving back to the community for all the support received during the difficult years. Thomas became a reference in sustainable construction in the region. He applied ecological and socially responsible techniques in his projects, always concerned with the environmental and social impact of his work. The couple renewed their wedding vows every 5 years, celebrating not only their love, but also the overcoming of the adversities that had almost destroyed their family. The vow renewal party always took place in the town's central square, open to the entire community. It was a moment of collective joy and celebration of the values that united the family and the community. Victoria continued visiting the town regularly, but now, as part of the family, she became the godmother to Caleb's children and a special advisor in all important decisions. "You changed my life as much as I changed yours," she would say. "Meeting this family taught me that lawyering goes far beyond the courtroom. It's about transforming lives and communities." The organization Victoria led became one of the most respected in the country in combating real estate corruption. The method developed from Caleb's case was successfully replicated in hundreds of similar situations. Arthur lived to be 82, long enough to see all the transformation his courage had made possible. His final years were peaceful and filled with recognition, surrounded by the gratitude of an entire community. His funeral was a moment of collective emotion. The whole town attended to pay their last respects to the man who had kept the secrets that freed so many families from injustice. Caleb gave the main speech at the funeral, recalling how Arthur represented the importance of never giving up the fight for what is right, even when victory seems hopeless. "Arthur taught us that each one of us can be a guardian of truth," said Caleb. He proved that age, social status, or limited resources don't prevent anyone from making a difference. Mrs. Susan took Arthur's place as the community's most experienced advisor. At 70 years old, she maintained the clarity and energy needed to continue guiding the new generations. The municipal library was named the Benedito Fernandez Community Library, a permanent tribute to the man who safeguarded the documents that changed the city's history. Caleb donated his personal collection of books on law and social justice to the library, creating a specialized section that would serve to train future generations of justice advocates. The Memorial Tunnel became a mandatory stop for students and researchers visiting the city. Specially trained guides told the complete story, from the initial discovery to the final transformations. A nearby university created a permanent internship program in the city, sending law, sociology, and public administration students to learn about transparency and citizen participation. The interns were supervised by Caleb and other local professionals, ensuring they received quality practical training in matters related to social justice and fighting corruption. It's important that future professionals understand that technical knowledge must always be in the service of justice and the common good, Caleb explained to the students. The city became the headquarters for a public transparency research center, funded by national and international universities, interested in studying the model of social development implemented there. Caleb was invited to join the research center's board of directors, contributing his practical experience and his vision regarding the challenges and opportunities in the fight against corruption. The center's work resulted in the publication of studies and manuals that were distributed free of charge to social organizations and governments interested in replicating similar experiences. "Our story proved it's possible to create lasting change," Caleb said during the launch of the manuals. "Now we want to help other communities forge their own paths toward justice." 20 years after the discovery of the documents in the tunnel, Caleb was elected mayor of the city. His campaign was based on the principles of transparency and participation that had guided his entire journey. His election represented the final consolidation of the transformation that began when he was just a curious boy. The city had chosen as its leader someone who personified the values it had fought for. "I accept this responsibility with humility and determination," Caleb said in his inauguration speech. "I will govern with the same transparency I demanded from others all these years." His administration implemented innovative mechanisms for public participation, including participatory budgeting, regular public hearings, and digital channels for direct communication between the government and citizens. The first project of his administration was the creation of a museum of the memory of the fight against corruption, installed in the old City Hall, where the crimes had been planned. The museum told the complete story of the case, from the discovery of the documents to the resulting social transformations. It was a way to preserve the memory and inspire new generations. Caleb made a point of personally guiding visitor groups through the museum, especially students and young leaders from other cities. "It's important that you understand this is not a story from the past," he told the visitors. "It's a story that continues to be written every time someone decides to fight for truth and justice." During his tenure as mayor, Caleb created an exchange program with other cities facing similar corruption problems. The program offered technical consulting and logistical support for struggling communities. "Our experience doesn't belong exclusively to us," he would explain. "It belongs to everyone who dreams of a more just world. Our responsibility is to share what we've learned." Martha was immensely proud of her son, who had become the city's mayor. Seeing the curious boy transformed into a respected leader was the fulfillment of all the dreams she had nurtured during the difficult years. "My son proved that it doesn't matter where you come from, but where you want to go," she would say in interviews. "Poverty doesn't define a person's character, nor limit their dreams." Thomas also felt fulfilled seeing the legacy his own struggle had left. Even though he had been forced to step away, his initial resistance had planted seeds that blossomed in his son's courage. "Sometimes we think our actions don't make a difference," he would reflect, "but every act of courage, no matter how small, can generate unimaginable transformations in the future." The Miller family became a symbol that profound social changes always begin with ordinary people who decide not to accept injustice as something normal or inevitable. Victoria was appointed National Secretary for combating corruption during the administration of a president committed to transparency. Her experience in Caleb's case was fundamental to her appointment. In her new role, she implemented on a national scale many of the strategies that had been successful in Caleb's city. The local model served as the basis for public policies with national reach. The Miller family case taught us that popular participation is the most effective instrument for fighting corruption, Victoria would say in her official presentations. The cultural centre that operated in the old train station expanded its activities and became a national reference for civic education. Young people from all over the country visited the place to participate in training programs. Caleb continued giving lectures at the centre, even with the responsibilities of the mayoral office. It was an activity he considered fundamental and that he would never abandon, regardless of other commitments. "Shaping consciousness is more important than holding positions," he often said. "My role as mayor is temporary, but my responsibility as an educator is permanent." His children, now adults, took on leadership roles in their respective fields. The environmental lawyer became a national reference in environmental law, the journalist won awards for investigative reporting, and the daughter chose to work in human rights. The third generation of the Miller family kept alive the commitment to social transformation, adapting the family values to contemporary challenges. "Our family learned that each generation has its own battle to fight," Caleb would say, observing his children's engagement. "The important thing is to never lose sight of the principles that guide us." The tunnel where it all began continued to be visited daily by dozens of people. A plaque at the entrance summarized its history and importance. "Here, a child's curiosity opened paths for justice." Caleb still visited the place regularly, especially when he needed to make important decisions or when he felt overwhelmed by the responsibilities of public life. "This is where I reconnect with my origins," he would explain. "This place reminds me why I started this journey and gives me strength to continue." 30 years after the events that changed his life, Caleb wrote his memoirs, a detailed book about the entire experience and its lessons. The book became required reading in schools across the region. "I wanted to write not just about what happened, but about what we learned," Caleb explained during the launch. "The lessons are more important than the facts." The book was translated into several languages, and studied at universities in different countries as an example of how local movements can generate significant systemic transformations. Caleb donated all the book's royalties to a foundation he created to support young leaders in vulnerable communities. It was his way of perpetuating the cycle of transformation that had begun in his own life. The foundation offered scholarships, leadership courses, and technical support to young people who showed potential to become agents of change in their communities. "I want to find and support other boys and girls who have the same curiosity and courage that brought me here," Caleb would say about the foundation's goals. Martha became the honorary president of the foundation, contributing her experience as a mother who supported a son on his journey of social transformation. Her talks for parents in underprivileged communities were in high demand, as she knew better than anyone the fundamental role of family in developing young leaders. "It doesn't matter what the family's financial condition is," she would say. "What matters are the values we pass on to our children and the support we give to their dreams." Thomas retired at 70 but remained active in the foundation as an advisor and mentor to young people in situations similar to what Caleb had experienced in childhood. "My experience as a father who had to be apart taught me a lot about the sacrifices we sometimes need to make for family," he would tell the young people. "But it also taught me that true love always finds a way back." The city continued to grow in a sustainable and balanced way, always maintaining the principles of transparency and participation that had made it famous. New mayors took turns in power after Caleb, but all were elected committed to continuing the transparent and participatory management model that had become a local tradition. "We created a culture of transparency that transcends individuals," Caleb noted, proud of the lasting impact of the transformations begun decades earlier. The last time Caleb visited the Memorial Tunnel was during the celebrations of the 50th anniversary of the discovery of the documents. At 62, he reflected on the entire journey traveled. If that 12-year-old boy could imagine everything that would result from that discovery in the tunnel, he thought, he'd probably be terrified by the responsibility. But at the same time, he felt grateful for having had the courage to act in that decisive moment. A single decision by a curious boy had changed the lives of thousands of people across several generations. His grandchildren, the fourth generation of the Miller family, grew up hearing their grandfather's stories and developing from an early age the same values of honesty, courage, and social commitment. "Grandpa, when I grow up, I also want to discover secrets and help people," his youngest granddaughter would say. "My dear," Caleb would reply, "the greatest secrets aren't hidden in mysterious places. They are within us, the courage to do what's right, the strength to never give up, and love for people." End of story. This was a fictional story created to touch our hearts. Now tell us what you thought. Do you believe Caleb made the right decisions throughout his journey? How long have you been following along? If you have something to share with us, leave it in the comments with sincere words. We will be delighted to read your opinions. Thank you so much for your company.